It's the start of 2025, so it's also the start of a new year of Threat Talks. We have a lot for you in store this year, and we're gonna do a sneak peek today of that. Welcome to Threat Talks. My name is Lieuwe Jan Koning, and from headquarters here at Untrusted, we bring you Threat Talks. Let's get on to it.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
Let me introduce my guest of today. That's Peter van Burgel. He is the CEO of AMS-IX. Well, last week we talked about last year, and today we're going to talk to you about next year and all our expectations. Welcome.
Thank you.
What's the main thing you're looking forward to in the upcoming year?
It's a good question. I'm naturally quite curious, and a couple of months ago I read an article on Harvard Business Review about the virtual CEO, and my first reaction was, "Oh, beep," and then I thought, "Oh, fun." So I'm looking forward to figure out how this agent stuff and virtualization of functions is going to work in 2025.
The virtual CEO.
Yes.
So that means that when we are at the end of this year looking back at 2025, I will be talking to your AI twin.
I don't think it's going to go that fast, but maybe.
Let's give it a shot.
Maybe
okay.
it's the challenge we want to go.
Definitely going to talk about what our expectations on AI on cyber in this episode. Great. Well, let's first. AMS-IX again. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. Could you again tell us what AMS-IX does and why cybersecurity is of interest of the company?
Yeah. So AMS-IX is short for Amsterdam Internet Exchange. So we are a place where internet companies come together and exchange internet traffic. There's about 90,000 networks globally that do that, and AMS-IX is one of the largest internet exchanges in the world, making sure people like you and me have access to internet. We're part of vital infrastructure in the Netherlands, and that's why we're also, not just because of that, but that's one of the reasons why we're concerned about cybersecurity and keeping the internet, but also society safe. So that's why we're here, and that's why we think this is an important topic. Because, I think we can do better in terms of awareness and protecting ourselves.
Protecting, yeah. Well, as you know, I speak a lot about zero trust, and we were discussing a little bit what do we expect of the year. And one of the things we were thinking of is zero trust a little bit extended in the sense that vendors maybe there may be a tendency to not allow certain software solutions, certain OT device, certain cars maybe in your country. So a zero trust supply chain kind of approach of stuff that doesn't pass the bar. Huh?
Yeah.
And that I mean we're in a increasing geopolitical complex world, you might say. Do you have some examples of things that you think that we should think about if we are talking about those kind of considerations?
Yeah. I think there are two levels, you could argue. One is actually the product itself. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of products being thrown on the market that have very poor or no security, for example. But as consumers, we just plug it into the network. And that's basically creating a threat. Two, we have a lot of so-called OT, operational technology equipment installed in our industries, whether it's in factories or power companies, etc., which has been installed many, many years ago when we were not as worried about security as we are today. And again, it's a weak spot in those networks. So that's the second layer. And the third one is geopolitical. So we see, for example, that the US and China, of course, are going at each other. And with all these bans, we're also potentially not able to get certain products simply because there is a trade ban on getting them. It has an element of just poor technology, but also an element of just prohibitive law and regulation to get to certain
lack
equipment.
Of trust between.
Yeah, we're just not allowed to use certain equipment because the government tells us you cannot. We don't like that country, therefore you cannot use that equipment.
Yeah, we've seen with Chinese switch vendors that were banned in government because they might control and cameras, for example, CCTV. In certain cities, it's no longer allowed to use them made in China. Yeah. And then, of course, we allow a lot of electrical cars made in China on our roads that, by design, talk to their mothership in IT.
Exactly.
In some cloud, probably controlled by. Yeah.
So it's a very complex situation, also because it's not just about the actual end product that you and I are buying or our organizations are buying, but there's a lot of semiconductor type stuff, parts in there and maybe that's not safe. So it's really becoming complex because of the digital nature of our industries and our societies. And for regular people, it's impossible to understand whether or not a product is safe given all these different components. So it's really becoming a complex.
It's also the first time, I think, in the history of IT that we're now, instead of doing more global, it's the opposite of globalization that we're getting into. But IT has always been collaboration, open protocols, talking to each other, interconnecting everything. Yeah. And now all of a sudden the world is getting a little bit in the opposite direction. Yeah. Maybe not all the way back, but at least be careful. That is something not to our nerds' nature, if you will, right?
No, geopolitically there is it's distancing rather than actually getting together. So yeah, I agree. We've had since the 90s, the end of history and the Berlin Wall falling and all of that period, very hopeful and open growth. I think we're retreating to some of the old ways. Again, reflecting also on one of the other episodes, it has been like that forever, those cyclical movements. But yeah, I agree. It's not necessarily a very positive thing that's happening, but it is happening.
Yeah, and on top of that all, there's the big tech that is centered in one country, predominantly steered by the legislation of that country. Most of it is, of course, in the United States. Yeah. Those borders of those big tech companies are not the same as continental or country borders. So that's also quite difficult. We see this with the AI Act, for example. We're going to talk about it a little bit later on. Yeah. That's also, the world is really complex in that sense, and it's hard to predict probably where that will end.
Yeah, one school of thought is that the CEOs of those companies are maybe more powerful than the prime ministers or presidents of certain countries. And I think there's truth in that. If you think of a company like Meta and Facebook as an application, if they switch it off, what will that do to a country, for example? So yeah, it's the dynamic
bias, the post a little bit.
All that too, of course, yeah. But it's becoming more and more complex in that sense, that it's not just countries we're looking at, but those companies are so powerful that it's adding to the complexity. I agree.
Another thing that we talked about before, when we prepared this episode is a gap in skills, a skill gap of what's expected. I mean, and we've been talking about this for years, but and still we think for next year it's still a thing. The request for technical capability, but not just that, ever increases.
Yes. Yeah, and again, it has to do with the fact that also in our branch of industry, the digitalization is just increasing and continuing and going at a rapid pace. The AI developments are again accelerating things. So it's also that those life cycles becoming shorter and shorter. So it's the skills are also how do you call it? Deteriorating, not deteriorating, but they're aging very quickly because of the speed of developments of technology. So that's a challenge, but also demographically, again, looking at Europe, Europe is aging. We have less youth than we have elderly people. So we have to find these people somewhere else, or we have to find ways to work more productively.
That's actually the same in Europe, but also in China, also in the United States. In the United States, a little bit less. Yeah. Africa is the only continent where the youth is still everywhere.
Yeah, I heard somewhere that the average age in Africa is like 20 or 21 or so. It's amazing. So a lot of
imagine that. Yeah.
But still, it's we need to figure out how to deal with that, and maybe AI can help with that somewhat. But we need to figure that out.
What strikes me also, if I, for example, see how we educate our security operations center people, they need to know more and more. Yeah. To start to be able to be effective to begin with, and the most obvious example maybe is if you were a Windows administrator, for example, there was a job for you to install Windows Server and all that. But now, I mean, the server to person ratio, to administrator ratio has risen so much that you need to do automation and know of Terraform, know of how clouds orchestrate, and the entry level is higher. So the junior jobs become higher, and that is concerning to many. I'm not too concerned about it because, but it's just a given that your path of education needs to be a bit longer.
Yeah, I've said this in another episode as well. So to me, some part of the reflection is it's been like this forever. So when we had the Industrial Revolution, we had to train people on, we didn't have enough people that knew how to run a steam engine or a mill or something like that. I think the challenge today is really that life cycle. It's so short that the replenishment of that knowledge is really a challenge. One, but also again the demographics. The other piece, though, is that what we do at AMS-IX, for example, is one of the KPIs that we've put in place is the time to competency. So we work with all our managers to figure out ways where we can really get our people to competency as quickly as possible. What's needed for that? Is that training, documentation? Is it hiring at a certain skill level? So, and also what things do we do ourselves? What can we potentially outsource? So it's a management team responsibility to figure out how to do that. On top of course, again, within nations, the Dutch government has this skill gap also as a strategic priority, figuring out how to work with the schools and the universities to get the right knowledge. When I graduated and was going to conquer the world because I had finished university, same thing. When I joined the workforce, of course, I knew nothing. I thought I knew a lot, but of course I knew nothing. So again, it's from every time. Difference today is really that the time to competency and the speed of developments in technology is really different, much higher, specifically in our line of business, than it was many years ago.
That actually started at a very young age, because what my son, he's a 7-year-old now, is exposed to, and the stuff he knows and the stuff he has access to. I mean, he's crazy about ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was 7, well, I did have a computer, but that was maybe an exception, but I didn't have access to that many knowledge. And kids really learn fast.
Yeah.
So it's also a natural evolution.
So if you look at it positively, your 7-year-old son is capable of adapting to that and learning in that fashion, etc. So I mean, hope is the last thing that goes, right? But I think there is positive hope that we will cope with it. But it's a massive challenge. It's a massive challenge.
And he will be educated for a job that doesn't yet exist.
Exactly.
Very likely.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of, I saw, I'll probably put it in the show notes. I saw a news article, and it was something like, it's so hard to keep up with time these days. The information is coming to us so quickly. We need to be always working. And the date of the article was 1880 something.
Yeah.
So it's indeed of all ages. So we shouldn't be worried about it. But it's still something. Well, like you said, you have an actual training. Training. You approach the hiring of new people. Differently.
So not to correct you, but I think we should be worried about it and we should be working on it. But it's not that it is just of this time. It's been like that forever.
Similar problems have been solved before, so why can't we do it again?
So we need to continue doing that. I keep on saying this. The real difference for me is the life cycles. So the life cycles are months, where maybe in our youth it was years. So the time to competency really is shrinking all the time. And that's where technology helps, but also is a burden, because it's
and more specialization. I mean, we're in the managed service business, so I know a thing of two from experience on that. But also the supply chain that we talked about last year. I mean, it's if you outsource stuff, then you also need to procure better.
Yes.
So that's a lot of emphasis going. We expect.
There is that expectation that specialism is going to go deeper because indeed of the technology developing, but also the knowledge you need to have even in an entry level. So as a generalist, you will struggle if you want to operate in that type of industry.
There's a lot of things that will be changed by AI. So we should probably talk a lot about that as well. But before we do, there is a treasure hunt, of course. And if you know the code, you'll see it in the screen right now, and I'll say it. It's 010101. It's a beautiful code, of course. Email it to us at code@threat-talks.com, and we'll get you one of those great t-shirts that you can also find on our website. AI. I mean, of course, last year was also, the breakthrough of AI was maybe a year ago or a bit longer, but the mainstream, it takes off in many ways. It's many implications on cybersecurity, but most of it actually in regular jobs, not even in technology. How do you, and you mentioned, hey, I'm going to make, we're going to see a virtual CEO. So You recently went to Silicon Valley to visit all those a lot of different companies. And it's not that I don't recognize you anymore, but it did change your mind a little bit.
It did, yeah. When I went
can
there,
you tell us about that?
So before I went, I was slightly skeptical in the application of AI. And also thinking of how I used it myself, it was really firing questions at ChatGPT or one of the other models. And in Silicon Valley, I think my eyes were opened in the sense that it is much further along and it's going really, really fast. And of course, it's going really, really fast there, and maybe not necessarily everywhere in the world yet. But what I think 23 was when ChatGPT was launched, and that really was the advent of these large language models and being able to ask a question and get amazing answers back. And that has developed really rapidly in the last 18, 24 months. And you could even argue there is an element of sort of a glass ceiling and how these models are. It's no longer exponential maybe how they develop, but they're still developing really rapidly. What the buzz was is in Silicon Valley today is multi-model, multi-agent AI. And what that means is that these models, there's these foundational models like ChatGPT and others. There's foundational models that do either language or other types of technology.
Such as image, movie, that stuff.
Exactly. So multi-model is two things. So it can do text, video, image, etc. So multimedia, you could argue, but also multi-model in a sense that it can plan, reason, and execute. So we've seen examples, not in demo, but really in real life, where software development AIs, for example, were asked a simple question in text. It created a plan. It did an online search on how to do this, created a plan, started to actually code. You could see it start writing code, correcting errors. So there's reasoning in there. How do I do this? And how do I translate that into a plan? There's planning in there. How do I do this? And when do I do what task in what order? Then there was a mistake, so they corrected the mistake, again, reasoning and replanning. And then they published the results on a website. So it built a website, published the results, and go, I think this is something you'll understand, so I'll do it in a graph.
You do the user testing.
And we looked at it, and it was like a 5-minute thing. So it built all of this, which was like a performance test on API. So it was really the positive way shocking, but to see that it could plan, reason, do text, language, graphs, videos, all of that. And I think that's where the general feeling there was. So 23 was about the launch, 24 was about the learning and the getting mature of those models, the aging of the models. 25 is really, and 24 is also about the proof of concepts. And 25 is really going to be about sort of the general adoption of generative AI. On the other end, what we're also seeing is that there were a lot of companies that felt that AI was going to be a quick win and they were going to get rid of 20% of their workforce and all of that sort of bold statements. And they're finding it's actually maybe not a marathon, but it's also not a 100-meter sprint. So more and more companies are starting to see the benefits of AI and these agents, but they also see it's actually hard work. So it's a little bit like implementing ERP back in the day. It felt like, once you got all your process and data in order, you'll be fine and you're going to be massively more productive.
Yeah, so it's no silver bullet. You actually have to have.
Yeah,
but it also means that you have to have will 2025 be the year of the AI officer, the C.
AI, complex. No, maybe. One final thing. All of them said it only works well if you have your data and your process in order, because that's giving you predictability of the outcome. Because remember, AI is predictive; it's not deterministic. So you have to get your data and your process in order, and many companies don't have that. So that's part of the reason why it's taking longer to be successful with it. It also is a sidestep into you having your data in order. Also is, of course, asking, is it actually my data and where is it? And if I'm training these models, how do I train it? Can I train it on my data? Or has that model been trained on data that is not mine? And is there an intellectual property thing, for example? So
there are some kind of bias that you don't want.
Yeah, there's that.
We have the OWASP top 10 for AI models now. Huh?
Yeah.
And these are on there.
Yeah. So it's actually quite complex. And so it's not a strange question actually to ask, will we have a chief AI officer? Because it's not just about the AI agent or the model. It's also about data ownership and data structures and your process, having that in place. And what sort of benefits do you want to gain? Is it going to help us fill the skill gap? And if so, how? So it's not just, I'll switch it on and
do
we're all
you
good.
need someone in your organization that has just one task? Make sure we get everything, benefit maximum on everything that AI has to offer. Would that be a dedicated thing in a company, you think? Would you do that for AMS-IX?
So I'm at AMS-IX, I'm not sure yet if it's going to be dedicated, but I am going to address it programmatically. So I'm looking at it as a program of change. And how do we implement it? And that's because of what do we want to achieve with it? What type of agents are we going to use? Where do they store their data? Things like that. But also, do we have our data in order ourselves? Do we have the privacy stuff organized? So that's why it has to be programmatic. But there will be multiple disciplines that will be working on it. Partially technology, partially legal, partially commercial. So yeah, I think
like security, it should be in the veins of the organization.
Yes, and
we know how hard that is with security.
Absolutely, and you need to look at it programmatically, in my view, because we talked about this in other episodes as well. Before you know it, you've got all this shadow IT of AI agents, and then you don't know where it's going, where your data is going, who's talking to who, because that's the other thing that these agents will introduce. You'll get agents talking to agents. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what they're talking about and how they're communicating with your customer potentially, then you've lost
your
control.
Bank account is empty. Yeah.
Well, maybe not that dramatic, but could be. So you have to coordinate and you have to figure out how you're going to deploy it. But it's coming and it's coming fast. And I think you need to be worried. So I'm building a virtual CEO for me, and can I interact with that, and how is that working, etc. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm interested and I want to play with it and etc.
What do you mean then? What's the first step? Is it like a company chatbot that they can talk to you 24/7 and you give answers?
Yeah, so
make decisions?
Potentially. Really? So there's several, these agents typically come aimed at a certain task, and they have a certain workflow programmed in it, right? So you have a customer service agent, for example. So they're geared towards getting a question and trying to get you the right answer. But there's also applications that are a bit more project management driven, for example. So one agent I'm using I've asked it, it has a plan for building a company strategy, right? And then the plan, of course, it planned it itself. And now I'm sort of negotiating with it and talking with it and feeding it information and trying to get answers from it and see if I agree to it. And the second experiment I want to start is that I want to sort of build the opposite of me. And then have a negotiation with myself. One is, why should I do it? And the other one is, why should I not do it? And it's just playing, but you can imagine that these models, of course, will grow and continue. And it may be not my personal CEO copy, but at large, right? This reasoning thing is really something that is new and very different from the early models that we've seen. So yes, decision making and execution is going to become a thing from AI. And how do we put the right guardrails around that to make sure they take good decisions and execute well?
Yeah, that's going to be a big challenge, especially. Well, we have the legislation in Europe, the AI Act. I was in the United States when iOS 18.2 launched, so I was able to experience Apple Intelligence
AI,
there.
Yeah.
But then I get home and it's disabled now. Huh? Yeah. So and that's because Apple basically said, hey, all those rules there, we cannot know, or we don't know how. Well, they're not really open about that, of course, but how to ever comply with it. And actually, we are also looking at the legislation ourselves with legal and with technology and CISO office. And yeah, it's for us required that everything we sell, that we also have like a AI attestation, and that we prove that we do not use the data for training in malicious ways, and that there's no bias towards whatever. That's difficult because then, if I resell something that's manufactured in the United States, those companies need to comply with that as well. Otherwise, I cannot sell it here. Yeah. It's quite a. I spoke to a government official like a year ago or so about this, and they said, "Well, our hope is that with the AI Act, it plays out the same as GDPR, because the effect of GDPR in Europe has been that for the big cloud, say Microsoft, implement GDPR worldwide, because it simply doesn't make sense to just do it for the European market, because it's the same everywhere. So then do GDPR. And they wanted to do AI in the same way.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like it's working, does it?
Not really currently. No, I agree. I think, but there's a couple of things there. So one, I think the legislation argument is somewhat of I'm a bit ambivalent to the argument. So I think the legislation argument on the one hand is valid because it is not entirely clear what it means and how it's implemented, and it may differ per country and all of that. But when I was in the US, I started, of course, asking. I'm biased. I'm European, so I started to ask some of these questions and talking about privacy and rules and regulations, and I said, yeah, it's all difficult and yada yada. And then I asked a different question, and I asked them, so on your intellectual property, do you actually use the public cloud to develop your product? Because that's what we're hearing,
You
right?
asked this AI companies in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and because we're being told all the time, yeah, you should use cloud to innovate faster and all of that. And all of them said, no, it's not safe because it's our intellectual property. We're not going to store that in the public cloud. And I was thinking, hang on. Right. So you are giving us trouble on the fact that we are trying to figure out things like privacy and intellectual property, and you're not storing your own intellectual property in the private cloud because you don't trust it. So it's very ambivalent in that sense. On the other hand, when you look at the investments going into AI, it's all happening in the US, in Silicon Valley, actually. Last year, or the last couple of years, the US grew 20% in productivity. More than 90% of that growth was done by 7 companies. Really? The hyperscale companies. So it's really through the investments they're doing, the structure they have. They're basically you could argue they're in their own industry almost. And they have figured out ways to accelerate and grow and in ways that are not capable in other industries.
Hasn't that been the same in all IT? I mean, if anybody drives through Silicon Valley, it's all the big brands that you use every day. You see there. At least as an IT person, it's like coming home, right? You feel warm, fuzzy feeling.
Yeah,
one after the other is that's where the digital world is created.
Yeah, because of
it's just that now I can't use it anymore.
No, but there's 2 pieces to that. 2 very important pieces. One is the entrepreneurship and the money flowing into that region much more than anything else, which is accelerating it. And they have such an advantage now that it's very hard to catch up, if ever. And somebody said, well, if you look at ChatGPT, it's maybe the Uber of AI. So they just have this head start, and that's why whoever comes up with new stuff, they will always be able to, because they now have the scale and the mass and the customers and all of that to do that.
Is this the common knowledge in Silicon Valley that ChatGPT is indeed ahead?
Yeah. Yeah. Although because of the how do you call that? The growth rate is slowing down a little bit. The others are catching up.
Plateau again, probably. Yeah.
So it's ahead a little. But
the reason I'm asking is that I follow all kinds of benchmarks. You have those AI benchmarks, and then now Gemini is best in all, and then new ChatGPT 4.0 is best in everything, and then Perplexity is the best. I mean, it seems like they're taking turns. It's like a drag race, and they're head to head.
Yeah, and they do, but it's also a little bit about us. Well, it's a lot about us as humans, and we are creatures of habit. So if you like the ChatGPT interface, you'll go back to ChatGPT. And if you like the Gemini interface, you'll continue going back to Gemini.
The limiting factor here is the human gets used to things.
Yeah, and as humans, we of course change at a very different pace than technology changes. So it's also trying to figure out how we keep everybody on board in doing this. They are on the one hand very optimistic, of course, about the growth, and you see the number of startups coming about every week, money flowing into it. But they're also concerned about the technology is going at lightning speed, but the adoption of it is actually difficult because as humans we just change very slowly.
So in cybersecurity and AI, we already talked a little bit about your training data, intellectual property, and where do you train your model? Where do you put your data in? That's of course a thing. What about? I mean, I remember in the early days of ChatGPT, in like end of 2023 or so, if you would start to type a configuration file, the username is, and then admin or so, or let's say AT&T admin, and then you type in password is equals, and then it puts in the password that actually works. Huh? So we are past that. But similar things, and then that's what the AI hallucination attacks and all those kind of things. This is going to be difficult, right? Because it's not like we put a firewall in, and we make a rule. Because how are we going to do that? Is that something that you think is of concern at all, or
Yes, yes. In generic terms, right, the technology always can be used for good and for bad. I think it's this classic saying of the gun association in the US. It's not the bullet or the gun killing the people; it's the people pulling the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, that's true for not to some extent. That's also true for digital technology. So also for security, and it's an arms race with the bad and the good guys trying to figure out how to apply it best. The difficulty with AI again, and the speed of how things are developing. So we also visited NVIDIA, for example, and they showed their latest virtual agent on screen. And it's literally like talking to you now. It's so real life that you can simply not distinguish. It's not a person. It's an AI. So short of hacks and cracks being done through an interface, right? It's also that. It's that people will be presented with voices or images of people that are so real that as human beings, we are no longer capable of distinguishing between.
It's no longer really a technical issue then.
No,
it's much more a society security thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed, because we've already seen attacks of Zoom calls of the CFO say, "Hey, you really need to have you to transfer this money right now," and with a fake person.
So again, it's going back to this competencies thing as well, where we talked about skills, right? It's not just skills in technology, but it's also the awareness that within my company, again, if my financial department gets an email from me, the CEO, wire this money, they never do it. Thank God. They always come by or check with somebody else. So why is this happening? So it's a very simple analog check to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen. But because of the barrage of new applications and the speed of things happening, as an ordinary individual, it's very difficult to fight that off. So yes, it's a risk. We should be concerned about it, and collectively, on the good side, figure out how we deal with that and wear it off.
How would you do that? Because there's a zillion tools for the same task.
Yeah,
they're all funded because there's lots of money in AI and lots of funding, and only 1 in 10, 15, 20 maybe companies will survive. So what do you pick?
Yeah, so at one of the presentations, they showed a slide of all the companies. It was Capgemini in their AI lab, and they showed a slide of all the startup companies they were working with at that time. And I think there were like 100 names or 120 names on the slide. I think I knew 2. May say something about
that we have so many top level domains right now. Come up with all the company names.
It may say something about me or about the slide. I don't know, but at least I knew about 2. And the guy said, well, if you come back 6 months from now, there's probably 50 new names on here and 50 have gone. Mm-hmm. So it's also a very high churn and companies being bought and people leaving other companies, starting their own. So there's a high churn. So you're right. It's very difficult to pick the right tools. So again, there's a likelihood, given the way this scaling works, right, of these large companies, that it's going to be American companies. The benefit they of course have is they have a very big home market, one language which they can expand into severely. A lot of money and capital put behind it to just grow in the US. Once you've got that critical volume, then it's very easy to then scale globally. Dutch companies or European companies, let's start with Dutch companies, we have a very small home market. So it's very difficult to scale to $1 billion company and then expand internationally. So again, it's not necessarily a technology thing, but more a CapEx and social thing or geological thing that probably is going to define who the winners are in this AI race again.
Yeah, that makes sense. We talked about supply chain before. Deciding that you want to work with a certain tool. I mean, we get a lot of questions about that today. Yeah. How do we go with it? Because there's this SaaS company, it's a SaaS solution, so they need to have multi-factor, and there's a whole bunch of things. But now there's those AI requirements. And then you might use it for half a year, and then they might be gone, or there's a better alternative. So if you are a CISO office, you need to be more flexible in your assessments, for example. I mean, before, if you would have a new vendor that you would onboard every month or so, well, a team can do that manually, right? But now it's going crazy.
Yeah.
So maybe there's an AI for that as well. Actually, I know our organization is looking at that at the moment. Can we do those assessments in that sense quicker?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd answer it 2 ways. So one, the recommendation is really to not pick one. Mm-hmm. But really think about, and it's complicated, but pick 2 or try and test and play with 2 or maybe 3. So if one of them stops or if their model stops, then you're not stuck with the one, but you can continue with others. So in the pace it's going today, it's very risky to pick one and go with that. Even if you would only go with ChatGPT, for example, or with Gemini or Claude, so that's one part of the answer. Play with different agents and applications, so to minimize the risk. The other thing is what they told us, what they've learned is that actually when you use, because of course the question came, but then I may get an older version and I'm not getting the latest and the greatest, etc. So another thing they learned is if they actually start splitting the questions, putting to these models, they get better results with the old version than asking the one question with the new version. So it's also about the prompting again, and it's about how you actually organize the work and organize the tasks. So even if you don't have the latest, greatest, there's still great benefits to be had from the quote unquote older models. And again, 12 months old, so 6 months old. So what are we talking about? So it's also really thinking about, again, your process and bringing that intelligence in, your data, and then picking 2 or 3 and continue to play with that. And then lock in on that one, maintain that as you do with every application, so you have control over it, instead of being in this rat race of having the latest version all the time. That's not beneficial currently with the rapid developments in AI.
So we should treat AI solutions a little bit more as snacks than as like a foundational thing. They come and go, and our IT departments and our CISO department, we need to cater for that.
Yes.
So, One last thing I wanted to briefly talk about is about the power that all those AIs consume. By the way, do you know, is this training the models predominantly, or is it also using them?
It is both, but today it is the training that is the biggest consumer of it today. But with the advent of agents and agents being deployed, that inference, they call it, is going to grow very rapidly. And I don't have it top of mind, but I can put it in the show notes if people want. There is this graph I saw about if you ask a question to Google or you ask a question to AI, it's like 100-fold or so. So also
25,000 I read with the latest models.
Whatever, it's huge.
It's amazing. We'll put it in the show notes. Indeed,
exactly. So it's huge, and so also we again are contributing to this power surge because we are asking all these questions, of course.
Yeah, so I hardly use Google. I just go to my favorite chatbot.
So you're crossing it now.
I'm crossing the CO2.
It's really it's a challenge. However, the developments are also such that they are starting to develop small language models that basically run on your phone. And it's more and more becoming about localization of data, using your local data. However, the data center build we see is, it used to be megawatt data centers. If you want to build an AI factory, it's at least a gigawatt. And if you look at the racks that have to go in, it's like 100-fold the time of power, the amount of power it uses than any normal other application. So the step up in power usage is immense, which is also why it's there's a good likelihood that growth is not quote unquote just going to happen in the US. It's also not just going to happen in Europe. The Middle East probably will have a good stab at it because they have land, power, money to build new data centers. Maybe the Nordics in Europe a little bit. But it's a big challenge. It's the biggest challenge in continuing to grow AI is figuring out land and power.
Yeah, because you need to have power indeed, cooling and all that. And sun would be nice. So the new oil is actually still in the Middle East.
And some connectivity to it as well, of course. So that also helps. But it's a big challenge for the data centers and the AI companies to figure out. But also for society again, because how do we produce all this power? And how do we produce that in a sustainable fashion? And how do we... So again, it's an amalgamation of challenges that need to be overcome to continue to grow at this pace.
Exciting times ahead of us.
Challenging, but also exciting times. Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder what we will say a year from now.
Yeah. Look back and if were any of the predictions correct? That's always the challenge, right?
We might look back. We'll before the episode, we'll check what we said.
It may be two virtual agents looking back, actually.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, well, it could even be an interactive podcast.
Yes.
So you can live ask your questions.
Look at Notebook LM of Google. It's amazing what it can do. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, if you're not into it, last thing then, I'm talking about AI a lot and how, in a security context, of course, it amazes me how little people are actually experimenting with it.
Yeah.
Even in our own company, it could be more. And I'm happy with the approach towards AI that we do ourselves. But there's so much. I talk to people, say, hey, how much time did you spend on creating this report? Oh, really? You could have done that in 5 minutes with some tweaks. And people are afraid of it and threatened a little bit by it. But you should embrace it and say, hey, listen.
Yeah,
I'm now going to do twice as much work.
There is a joke in there somewhere, but given the 58 countries I'll talk to you offline about it. But basically, there is before I went to Silicon Valley on this tour last month, I was a bit skeptic in that everybody's talking about it, nobody's using it, and and you need that experience to really enjoy it or to get the benefits of it. But coming back, even if that's still the case, the speed with which this is happening and without us even knowing, it's forced upon us because it is going to be in your phone and it is going to be in applications and it is going to be in the apps you use online. And large companies also in the Netherlands use it to interact with their customers. So you are going to get exposed to it whether you want it or not. So yeah, you better embrace it and adapt to it because it's coming.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for today.
Thank you.
It's going to be an exciting year. Also, thank you to our viewers for today. Thank you for tuning in. And if you like this episode, please like it as well, because it helps us spread the word further. And while you're there, also subscribe to it, because that will make sure that next week you will have our next episode in your inbox. From Untrusted, the Netherlands, we thank you very much and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Untrusted Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.